So a fresh new week has arrived, and here on this channel, that means one thing and one thing only. Every weekend I post an episode of the series we do called Your Take Not Mine, where I turn to you, the viewers, to give me your hottest NBA takes of the week, based on what's going on at the time, and I then choose my favorite submissions and discuss them in a video. This week, we saw a few trades happen, the NBA Cup is approaching the finish line, and plenty more buzz has come about, so we definitely have plenty to discuss. In order to submit your takes, I make a community post on either the day of or the day before the video, similar to the one that you see on your screen now. So if you want a chance to be featured in a future episode, be sure to stay on the lookout for that. Before we start though, it turns out a good amount of you watching right now aren't even subscribed to the channel, so if you enjoy the content, consider hitting the subscribe button, as not only does it help out a ton, but it also very much appreciate it. Now with that being said, let's begin. The first take we'll be discussing today comes to us from CTB, and he says that Jimmy Butler's play as of late should scare teams away from even offering a first-round pick for him in a trade, as he's an aging star who is also becoming a locker room cancer. If you can take a step back and look at Butler's journey through the NBA as a whole, you see someone who has definitely been on a pretty wild ride filled with plenty of highs and lows too. He was the last pick of the first round back in the 2011 draft. He started his career fighting for minutes to even be a role player. He emerged out of nowhere in his fourth season on the Bulls as an all-star talent with the grit and toughness rivaling the best in the game, and has consistently overcome barriers people counted him out of. He's also butted heads with quite a few people along the way, which is always going to come with a bit of backlash and controversy. Early on, Butler hadn't really accomplished much, so the general consensus was that he was a bit too egotistical for his own good, but I've always felt that he got a bad rap, and it was overblown, because ultimately he's just the kind of guy who wants to win at all costs, and the people that he butted heads with have typically been those that weren't really putting in the work to succeed. Since his arrival in Miami, he has taken generally outmanned rosters to tremendous heights, making 3 trips to the Eastern Conference Finals and 2 trips to the NBA Finals, and even though he's never led them to a title, it's impossible to deny his drive and overall production being as good as anybody's on the big stage. Yet, Butler is once again butting heads with ownership and the front office, and Butler himself may not be having the most prolific season ever this year, but I very much disagree with the take at hand. Butler is getting older, so the simple fact is that he's not going to be able to bring his A game night in and night out for 82 games. In the playoffs though, Butler is still absolutely someone that teams will want on their side if they have championship aspirations. So with Butler now being on the trade block, according to several reports, the Heat should definitely still be receiving strong offers for him, including at minimum a first-round pick included and a few other assets. There has been talk that Butler could opt out of his player option for next season and hit free agency in 2025, so that will also be kept in mind during trade talks, but even with all of that being said, Butler's reputation as a playoff riser is well established, and if he gets moved, it will be to a team near the top of the standings, knowing full well the reward that could outweigh the risk. The next take we'll be discussing today comes to us from Frank, and he says that the Knicks championship window closed as a result of going all in with this core after wasting 5 first-round picks, along with the fact that their 2 star players are mediocre, struggling defenders. I don't think any team dominated headlines this offseason as much as the Knicks did, with them making 2 of the biggest trades of the entire period, putting together an incredible starting lineup on paper. Last year, it seemed like the Knicks were leveling up and ready to make some real noise in the playoffs, but unfortunately, injury luck held them back of that. But now, with Towns and Bridges being in town, every fan, analyst, and media outlet has pegged them as a group that should compete with the Celtics at the top of the East, at least before the season started. That, however, isn't quite what has been going down this season for them. They're still in 4th place in the Eastern Conference standings, which isn't bad by any means, but it's also a lot less impressive when you take into account just how bad 75% of the Eastern Conference has been this season. Where things are going well is on the offensive end, where the team is actually the 2nd best ranked offense in the league, and that's where the addition of Towns has been a blessing. The trade-off, however, is that his struggles on the defensive end are noticeable, for and Knicks organization, which has otherwise prided themselves on their defensive identity over the last few seasons, they are now just the 17th ranked defense, slightly below average. I think the original take is a bit of an overreaction, saying that they're absolutely cooked and have no chance at a title, but after you ship out a majority of your assets and sacrifice depth for star talent, you would ideally like for it to result in pretty constant dominance and production, and the Knicks arguably don't look that much more threatening than they did a year ago. Plus, with their bench being less threatening overall, and their starters needing to be overworked even more, playing more minutes than almost every other team's starters in the league, which is pretty typical for a Tom Thibodeau starting lineup, it's not crazy to take into consideration the possibility that they may burn out at the end of the season with injuries and tired legs, which could hold them back. For what they gave up, being above average is not good enough, so it's hard not to see what the Cavaliers are doing and think that's what the Knicks should be doing. And finally, the last take we'll be discussing today comes to us from Yaman, and he says that the Spurs are a legitimate playoff threat with a real chance to make a deep run. 25 games into the season, the Spurs have a winning record, which, for a young rebuilding team in the position that they're in, is absolutely notable and impressive. With Victor Wembanyama taking further strides as a scorer, veterans like Chris Paul and Harrison Barnes providing some balance, and their younger depth contributing positively in their roles, I see why their fans want to look ahead to greater heights, but I think we need to keep things in perspective here a bit. Even with the team having a winning record right now, the Spurs are in just 11th place in the Western Conference standings, because that's just how tough the stacked conference is this year. There is a lot of competition around them to even get a spot in the play-in tournament, and while the standings are so compact, with 7 teams being within a game and a half of each other right now, I just don't think that's enough for me to buy in to them being any sort of real threat yet. The Spurs are the 14th ranked offense and the 19th ranked defensive team this year, which is as mediocre as it gets, and typically teams trying to make noise at least rank in the top 10 on one end of the floor. Victor Wembanyama is improving as a shooter, and he's getting more easy looks than ever thanks to the presence of Chris Paul, but stacking them up against teams like the Lakers, Suns, Timberwolves, and Nuggets, who are near them in the standings, I'm not taking the Spurs over any of those groups. It's important to remain patient, and young teams will come along at their own pace, so the Spurs definitely have a promising trajectory, but I view them similar to how last year's Rockets were, where they took a big leap forward but ended up just missing the play-in tournament. Then they came back this season, which was of course the next year, and now the Rockets are on fire. The Spurs are still probably at least a year away from being a real threat, and that's perfectly okay. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below what you think about the takes discussed. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.